Human Geography, Chapter 2, Part 2. The Changing Global Context. Places and regions in global context. Contemporary globalization. Globalization is the increasing interconnectedness of different parts of the world through common processes of economic, environmental, political, and cultural change. As we have seen, globalization has been underway since the inception of the modern world system. In the 16th century, in the 19th century, when the competitive system of states fostered the emergence of international agencies and institutions, global networks of communication, a standardized system of global time, international law, and internationally shared notions of citizenship and human rights. The basic framework of modern globalization came into being. Global connections today, though, differ in at least four important ways from those in the past. 1. They function at much greater speed than ever before. Globalization operates on a much larger scale, leaving few people unaffected by and wielding in its influence in even the most remote areas. 3. The scope of global connections is much broader and has multiple dimensions: economic, technological, political, legal, social, and cultural, among others. 4. Interaction and interdependencies among numerous global actors have created a new level of complexity for the relationships between places and regions. Over the past 35 years, telecommunications, technologies, corporate strategies, and institutional frameworks have combined to create a dynamic new geographical framework. Emerging information technologies have helped create complex and frenetic international financial system, while transnational corporations are now able to transfer their production activities from one part of the world to another. In response to changing market conditions and changing transportation and communication technologies, see Chapter 8, now products, markets, and organizations are both spread and linked across the globe. Governments, in their attempt to adjust to this situation, have sought new ways of dealing with the consequences of globalization, including unprecedented international political and economic alliances such as NAFTA and the European Union, see Chapter 10. The economic basis of the contemporary globalization depends on myriad commodity chains that crisscross global space. Commodity chains are networks of labor and production processes that originate in the extraction of production of raw materials and whose end result is the delivery and consumption of a finished commodity. See Box 2.2. Visualization geography commodity chains. These networks often span countries and continents, linking into vast global assembly lines. The production and supply of raw materials, the processing of raw materials, the production of components, the assembly of finished products, and the distribution of finished products. As we shall see in Chapter 8, these global assembly lines are increasingly important in shaping places and regions. Globalization also has important cultural dimensions. See Chapter 5. One is quite simply the diffusion around the world of all sorts of cultural forms, practices, and artifacts that had previously been confined to specific places or regions. Examples include ethnic and regional cuisine, world music, Caribbean carnivals, and charismatic Christian sects. Another dimension of cultural globalization derives from consumer culture. Everything that is sold in international markets, from sneakers, replica soccer shirts, and automobiles to movies and rock concert tours. This had led some observers to believe that globalization is producing a new set of universally shared images, practices, and values, literally a global culture. All this adds up to an intensified global connectedness and the beginnings of the world as an interdependent system. Or to be more precise, this is how it adds up for the 900 million or so of the world's peoples who are directly tied to global systems of production and consumption, and who have access to global networks of communication and knowledge. All of us in this globalizing world are in the middle of a major reorganization of the world economy and a radical change in our relationships to other people and places. At first glance, it might seem that globalization will render geography obsolete, especially in the more developed parts of the world. High tech communications and the global marketing of standardized products seem as if they might soon wash away the distinctiveness of people and places, permanently diminishing the importance of differences between places. Far from it. The new mobility of money, labor, products, and ideas actually increases the significance of place in some very important ways. The more universal the diffusion of material culture and lifestyles, the more valuable regional and ethnic identities become. The faster the information highway takes people into cyberspace, the more they feel the need for a subjective settling, a specific place or community they can call their own. The greater the reach of transnational corporations, the more easily they are able to respond to place to place variations in labor markets and consumer markets. As a result, economic geography has to be reorganized more frequently and more radically. The greater the integration of transnational governments and institutions, the more sensitive people have become to local cleavages of race, ethnicity, and religion. For some places and regions, globalization is a central reality. For others, it is still a marginal influence, while some places and regions have become more closely interconnected and interdependent as a result of globalization. Others have been bypassed or excluded. In short, there is no experience of globalization. The reality is that globalization is variously embraced, resisted, subverted, and exploited as it makes contact with specific cultures and settings. In the processes, places are modified or reconstructed rather than destroyed or homogenized. Key issues in a globalizing world. The integrated global system has increased awareness of a set of common problems: climate change, pollution, disease, crime, poverty, and inequality that many see as a consequence of globalization. The globalization of the contemporary world, it causes and effects on specific aspects of human geographies at different spatial scales, is a recurring theme through the rest of this book. Here we note in a broad outline the principal issues associated with contemporary globalization. Here's the human footprint. Sorry, I was reading that. Key issues in globalizing world. The integrated global system has increased awareness of a set of common problems: climate change, pollution, disease, crime, poverty, and inequality that many see as a consequence of globalization. The globalization of the contemporary world, its causes and effects on specific aspects of human geographies at different spatial scales, is a recurring theme through the rest of this book. Here we note in broad outline the principal issues associated with contemporary globalization. Environmental issues. The sheer scale and capacity of the world economy means that humans are now capable of altering the environment at the global scale. The footprint of humankind extends to more than four-fifths of Earth's surface. Figure 2.14. One of the important issues facing modern society are the consequences, intended and unintended, of human modifications of our physical environment. Humans have altered the balance of nature in ways that have brought economic prosperity to some areas and created environmental dilemmas and crises in others. For example, I will come back to this page. For example, clearing land for settlement, mining, and agriculture provides livelihoods and homes for some, but also transforms human populations, wildlife, and vegetation. The inevitable byproducts, garbage, air and water pollution, hazardous waste, and so forth, place enormous demands on the capacity of physical systems to absorb and accommodate them. Climate change, as a result of human activity, in particular our burning of fossil fuels, agriculture, and deforestation, that cause emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, also has profound implications for environmental quality. Without concerted action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the global average surface temperature is likely to rise by a further 1.8 to 4.0 degrees Celsius. This century has, since pre-industrial times, even the lower end of this range would experience a temperature increase of above 2 degrees Celsius, the threshold beyond which irreversible and possibly catastrophic changes become far more likely. Projected global warming this century is likely to trigger serious consequences for humanity and other life forms. These consequences may include a rise in sea levels of between 18 and 59 centimeters, which will endanger coastal areas and small islands, and a greater frequency and severity of extreme weather events. In addition to the specter of global warming, we are facing serious global environmental degradation through deforestation, desertification, acid rain, loss of genetic diversity, smog, soil erosion, groundwater depletion, and the pollution of rivers, lakes, and oceans. Excuse me. The fate of Lake Baikal in Russia provides a distressing example. It is a place of incredible beauty, the pearl of Siberia that has long been emblematic of the prime wilderness of the region. The lake holds 20% of the world's fresh water and is home to 2,500 species, many of them found nowhere else, such as the world's only exclusive freshwater seal. The lake has warmed 1.21 degrees Celsius. It's 2.18 degrees Fahrenheit since 1946 due to climate change. Almost 3 times faster than global air temperatures, the lake's purity and unique ecosystem have also been compromised by environmental mismanagement. When thousands of the lake's freshwater seals began dying in 1997, the lake's fragile ecology came under international scrutiny, and in 1988, the lake was designated a World Heritage Site by UNESCO, the UN Cultural Agency, in 2007. The Russian government declared the Baikal region a special economic zone to encourage tourism. Nevertheless, it remains to be seen whether Russia can solve its environmental problems at a time when its economy is still in transition. Environmental issues such as these point to the importance of sustainability. Sustainability is about the interdependence of the economy, the environment, and social well-being. This is often couched in terms of the 3 E's of sustainable development, referring to the environment, the economy, and equity in society. The oft quoted definition of sustainable development from the Brundtland Report, which examined the issues on the international scale, is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. Here's the map. And I will go back to that page so that you may see the section of 2.2, Visualizing Geography, should you wish to pause. And then here is a scope of the thing. Health issues. The increased intensity of international trade and travel has also heightened the risk and speed of the spread of disease. A striking example of the health risk associated with the increasing interdependency has been the spread of the MERS Middle East Respiratory Syndrome virus. First reported in 2012 in Saudi Arabia, MERS is a coronavirus in the same family as the severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS virus, that caused an international epidemic in 2003, infecting around 8,000 people and killing more than 700 of them before it was stopped. By 2014, MERS cases had been reported in a dozen other countries. Today, healthcare professionals are concerned that a new strain of influenza virus is likely to result in an influenza pandemic. A pandemic is an epidemic that spreads rapidly around the world with high rates of illness and death. Entirely new flu strains develop several times each century because no one has a chance to develop immunity to a new flu strain. It can spread rapidly and widely, and especially so in today's globalized and highly interconnected world. Similarly, there is a serious concern about the possibility of epidemics in the human population resulting in the zoonotic diseases originating with the other species. Example, anthrax, avian flu, Ebola, West Nile virus. Security issues. As sociologist Ulrich Beck has pointed out, the high degree of interdependence that is now embedded in globalizing and highly interconnected world has brought about all sorts of security issues. In traditional societies, the risks faced by individuals and groups were associated mostly with hazards generated by nature, disease, flood, famine, and etc., along with socially determined hazards such as invasion and conquest and regressive forms of thought and culture. The industrial societies of the 19th and 20th century, with more powerful technologies and weaponry, faced still more hazards, but they were mostly local and regional in nature. Contemporary society, Beck points out, is characterized by another set of hazards, many of them uncontrollable and with a global reach. Examples include climate change as a result of human activity, the spread of weapons of mass destruction, i.e., nuclear and biological warfare, the risks of accidents involving radiation and or contamination by radioactivity from nuclear fuel or nuclear waste, the risk of epidemics in the human population resulting from zoonotic diseases, the risk of epidemic diseases in food animals such as the devastating outbreak of foot and mouth disease, which affects cattle and sheep in parts of northwestern Europe in 2001, and the risk of a catastrophic instability in global financial markets. Overall, Beck argues we are moving toward a risk society in which the significance of wealth distribution is being eclipsed by the distribution of risk and in which politics, both domestic and international, is increasingly about avoiding hazards. As a result, knowledge, especially scientific knowledge, becomes increasingly important as a source of power, while science itself becomes increasingly politicized, as for example in the case of global warming. Increased awareness of the multiple risks faced by places and regions has focused attention on the concept of resilience. Resilience is the ability of people, organizations, or systems to prepare for, respond, recover, and thrive in the face of hazards. The goal is to ensure the continuity and advancement of economic prosperity, business success, environmental quality, and human well being. Despite external threats in a globalized world, only the most resilient places and regions will remain economically competitive and attractive for business growth and capable for adapting to continually changing conditions. Resilience requires the capacity to reorganize and the ability to create and sustain the capacity to learn and adapt to change. Both are attributes that are more widespread in core regions than our semi peripheral and peripheral regions. Here's 2.3 Window in the World. And here's this section. Here's 2.4 Core Periphery Disparsity. I'm so sorry. Westernization and cultural imperialism. Political scientist Benjamin Barber characterizes the cultural tensions associated with contemporary globalization as jihad versus McWorld. McWorld is shorthand for the pop culture and shallow materialism that is part of Western capitalist modernization. Jihad is shorthand for cultural values that are underpinned by religious fundamentalism, traditional tribal allegiances, and opposition to Western materialism. Note that the term jihad properly refers to a struggle waged as religious duty on behalf of Islam. Neither jihad nor McWorld is conducive to a healthy democracy or civil society, argues Barber, while tensions between the two make for potentially volatile situations. At the heart of these tensions is a marked disillusionment with the West, especially within traditional Islamic societies. Across much of the world, modernization is now taken to mean Westernization, figure 2.17, and more specifically, Americanization. Most Americans think of modernization as necessary and good, but many other people see it as the cause of their exploitation. In most peripheral countries, only a minority can enjoy Western style consumerism, and the impoverished majority is acutely aware of the affluence of the core countries. While the gap between rich and poor countries has actually been widening for several decades, the U.S. aid budget, already low compared to the aid budgets of other developed countries, has been declining substantially. The United States, as a result, tends to be easily portrayed as, as a swaggering superpower, rigging the world systems to serve its own interest and doing relatively little by way of the economic or humanitarian aid. The current phase of globalization thus involves a distinctive new geopolitical element that has been described as the new imperialism. The imperialism of the United States, the world's only superpower, although Americans do not like to think of their country as territorially aggressive or exploitive, the war on terror and invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq following the Al Qaeda attacks in 2001 are widely interpreted elsewhere in the world as an exercise in imperialism, motivated in large part by a desire for military control over global oil resources. The interpretation of the United States as the instigator of new imperialism has been reinforced by military threats against Iran, North Korea, Syria, and the Islamic State, deployment of special forces around the globe, use of the extraordinary rendition, the apprehension or kidnapping of suspects, followed by their transfer to countries known to employ harsh interrogation techniques or torture, and unilateral rejection of of international environmental treaties and international aid agreements. What is less widely discussed in the world's newspapers is that this new imperialism is also viewed by some academics as the result of a highly competitive global economic environment in which the United States is no longer able to achieve superiority through innovation, product design, productivity, and marketing, and so has had to resort to military intervention. Future geographies. The globalization of the capitalist world systems involves processes that have been occurring for at least 500 years. But since World War II, world integration and transformation have been remarkably accelerated and dramatic. How will the forces of broadening global connectivity and the popular reaction to them change the fates and fortunes of world regions whose current coherence owes more to 18th and 19th century European colonialism than to the forces of integration and disintegration in the 21st century? Optimistic futurists stress the potential for technological innovations to discover and harness new resources, to provide faster and more effective means of transportation and communication, and to make possibly new ways of living. Space and place, we are led to believe, will be transcended by technological fixes. Pessimistic futurists stress to the finite nature of Earth's resources, the fragility of its environment, and population growth at rates that exceed the capacity of peripheral regions to sustain them. Such doomsday forecasting scenarios include irretrievable environmental degradation, increasing social and economic polarization, and the breakdown of law and order. The sort of geography associated with these scenarios is also rarely explicit, but it usually involves the probability of a sharp polarization between the haves and have-nots at every geographical scale. Fortunately, we don't have to choose between the two extreme scenarios of optimism and pessimism. Using our geographical imagination, we can suggest a more grounded outline of future geographies. To do so, we must first glance back at the past, then looking at the present trends and using what we know about processes of geographic change and principles of spatial organization. We can begin to map out the kinds of geographies that the future most probably holds. Looking back at the way that the geography of the world system has unfolded, we can see that a fairly coherent period of economic and geopolitical development occurred between the outbreak of World War I in 1914 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. Some historians refer to this period as the short 20th century. In this short century, the modern world was established along with its now familiar landscape and spatial structures. From the industrial landscapes of the core to unintended metropolises of the periphery, from the voting blocks of the West to the newly independent nation states of the South. Today, much of the established familiarity of the modern world and its geographies seem to be disappearing. We have entered a period of transition triggered by the end of the Cold War in 1989 and rendered more complex by the geopolitical and cultural repercussions of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, and the global financial meltdown of 2008. Obviously, we cannot simply project our future geographies from the landscapes and spatial structures of the past. At the same time, we can only guess at some aspects of the future, but we can draw some conclusions from a combination of existing structures and budding trends. We have to anticipate how the shreds of tradition and the strands of contemporary change might be woven into new landscapes and new spatial structures. Among the relative certainties over the next decade or so are the increasing power and influence of East and Southeast Asia. With its enormous population and its untapped natural resources, a general shift in relative wealth and economic power from the west to the east, an increased probability of a conflict in the Middle East, and an intensification of problems resulting from pressure on food, water, and energy resources. Among the key uncertainties are the spread of climate change, the result of the Arab Israeli conflict, and the effectiveness of alternative energy technologies. In subsequent chapters, we examine these and related issues in detail. Conclusion: places and regions everywhere carry the legacy of a sequence of major changes in world geography. The evolution of world geography can be traced from the prehistoric hearts of agricultural development and human settlement through the trading systems of the pre-capitalist, pre-industrial world to the modern world. The foundations of the modern world are industrialization, colonization, and the international market economy. Today, these foundations can be seen in the geography of the information age, a geography that provides a global context for places and regions. Today's world is highly integrated. Places and regions have become increasingly interdependent, linked through complex and rapidly changing commodity change, orchestrated by transnational corporations using new technology systems that allow for instantaneous global telecommunications and flexible patterns of investment and production. These corporations span the world. This integration blurs some natural and regional differences as the global marketplace brings about dispersion of people, tastes, and ideas. The overall result, though, has been an intensification of differences between the core and the periphery. Within this new global context, local differences in resource endowments remains and people's territory impulses endure. Many local culture continue to be resilient or adaptive. Fundamental principles of spatial organization also continue to operate. The emergence of globalization with its transnational architectural styles, dress codes, retail chains, and popular culture, and ubiquitous immigrants business visitors and tourists seems as if it might inevitably impose a sense of placelessness and dislocation, a loss of territory identity, and an erosion of the distinctive sense of place associated with certain localities. Yet the common experiences associated with globalization are still modified by local geographies. The structures and flows of globalization are variously embraced, resisted, subverted, and exploited as they make contact with specific places and specific communities. In the process, places and regions are reconstructed rather than effaced. Often, this involves deliberate attempts by the residents of a particular area to create or recreate territorial identity and a sense of place. Human geographies change, but they don't disappear. Here is the summary. Should you wish to pause? Key terms. Also review and discussion. And unplugged. Data analysis. And this is the end of chapter 2, part 2. Thank you.